Okay, what's going on YouTube? Understand this. I understand that we have a whole bunch of problems with marriage and family, and it is on a decline overall. Okay, but I will say this: you can't take comfort in this whole idea that marriage and the family is going down for everybody. If you take the national average, of course it is. But if you look at certain groups, okay, especially certain minority groups, you will clearly see that they are not struggling with the whole idea of marriage and family. So, with the decline of marriage and family, one might say you will see the decline of white privilege and white power, because power and wealth is held in the family and not one person. The family name, the family trust, it is bigger than just one person, because one person can die. Okay? But if it's in a family name, then it's there forever. We can all agree on that. So you might see the whole demise of white power, but it doesn't mean that no one will fill that void. Okay? No one, so for me, if I'm a Middle Eastern person or an Asian or another minority group, who is typically known for doing well academically and professionally, I'm just licking my chops, because I know in a couple of generations, hey, I will fill that void and I will be at the top. So to me, the way I look at it now, we have a situation where we have the potential to get in on the ground level. Okay, to me, whichever minority group or group of people can somehow manage to navigate this storm of failed families and failed marriages will do well eventually. This goes back to the whole idea of not thinking about you, but thinking about the future. Thinking about your name in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years down the line. This is where you get in. Okay? Power is never given to you. You have to take it, or the person in power has to fall. We've all seen the gangster movies, and no one just works their way up. It's either you kill your way to the top, or somebody gets killed and you take their spot. So one might say, the whole idea of white power or white privilege is on the decline, because their families are declining, not as slow, not as quickly as people want to say. Okay, because at the end of the day, like I said before, most people with wealth and power understand the value of family. But overall, it is on the decline, and this is where we as black people can work ourselves up. Okay, the way I look at it, we can either be on the winning side of this trend, or we can be on the losing side of this trend. But it really starts now. Really, it really does. Because like I said, other minority groups, to be real with you, their families are intact. If we're talking about Middle Eastern culture or whatever, the whole idea of marriage on the decline isn't going anywhere. Now, in terms of blacks and whites, yes, some might say that's what's going on with us, but, America is much more than black and white. We focus on black and white because it's the opposites. Okay, it's the opposite. It's the North Pole and the South Pole. But there's so many countries in the middle. Okay, but we assume that, we understand how the world works if we understand how black people view it and how white people view it. But there's people in the middle who are like, we're doing well. For example, this whole recession in the housing market. When I drive around or, certain neighborhoods and I see houses for sale and I see people looking at the houses to buy, for the last 2 years, I've only seen Asians and Middle Easterns looking at different houses. Not even to buy to live in because they have nowhere to live, but as investment properties. So they weren't shook by the economy, or at least not to the same level that, whites and blacks were. They weren't shook at all. They were capitalizing off of what was going on, and this is an example of what I'm talking about. So just look at the financial situation now, and look how certain, minority groups are not really affected. And just magnify that by 1 million in terms of the decline of white culture. Okay? If you have your stuff together and a system should fail, you can come out on the winning side of the equation, right? You can. It goes back to the story of the three little pigs. Okay? The bad wolf came around and blew their houses down, but that third little pig had what? He had his shit together. So when the shit hit the fan, he was doing okay. He wasn't worried. Okay, his brothers lost their homes, and when that wolf left, he could have said, I think I'll take up their land as well. Let me build a bigger house. Let me not build a hut. Let me build a home or something, and it's that kind of thinking. But it starts with understanding that your power comes from your family. Okay, it comes from your strong marriage and your strong family. Okay, it's a team. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's a team. Not to get too personal, but what upsets me is you guys hear me say I have uncles here and there, but in terms of my true uncles, okay, that are traceable by blood, I have 4, okay, and they're all doing well, but we're not close. They're not close. They got into beefs here. There's some gaps between age ranges, so there's a lot of beef between, hey, I'm not the little brother anymore, don't treat me like I'm 7, I'm a grown man, and there was a lot of beefs. But if they would have stayed together, the economic power that they would have had would have been ridiculous. Okay? We would have owned a whole bunch of property to the point where I'd have been taken care of. I would have been, managing some business or something, making great money. And all my cousins, we would all have been set up. That's how well my uncles were doing. But because they were beefing, they split apart. So you have to understand, when you have family, you can pool your resources. And people are just thinking about their own individual family, okay? But you have your brother's family. If your family is weak or you don't have any family, and your brother's doing the same, look how weak you are. But just imagine a situation where your sister's family is strong, your family is strong, your cousin's family is strong, and now you have all those resources to pull from. And just imagine how much damage you can do. This is what all the other model minorities do. This is why the Asians never get shook. Okay, they pool their resources. Before I'm done, I just have to give you guys another example of what I'm talking about. My uncle, okay, he has a cabin or a home in a mountain area, okay, and he wanted to buy a small hotel. And the way he broke it down to me, he would have bought it, had a manager working there, and pretty much just off that alone, he would have made, I think, $300,000 a year with minimal work, okay. It was just set up that way. But he lost out because he lost to a team of Asians, okay, who pooled their money together and bought it, and they didn't really need financing or the amount of financing that he needed. So he needed to go through the banks to get his money for it, and they didn't. So he ended up losing. Okay, so now that team of Asians, whether investors or whatever, have a property that they make $300,000 off of, and they don't even, they may come every now and then to check on it. But if my if my uncles were together, okay, if they were thinking and they weren't beefing, they would have had that property. Okay, they would have had that property. And they could have hired, maybe me or one of my other cousins, and, we could have been the manager up there, and they pay us $50,000 a year, and, it's just something small, keeping it in the family. And it's hard for a lot of people to understand this. And for me, coming from Southern California, you see a lot of it. You see the Persians, you see all these other Middle Eastern, Mediterranean type countries and Asians act this way. Okay? The whole idea of keeping it in the family. And to me, right now, I would say as of right now, this is probably my biggest focus. This is my biggest concern, because we really have the opportunity to get in on the ground level if those of us who are progressively thinking can take it to the next level and not be so concerned with thinking about yourself and you doing well, but thinking in terms of the family and thinking bigger. Okay, a fist can do much more, right? Because you got 5 separate fingers working together, and hopefully we can really sit down and marinate on it, and people can really understand it in that sort of context, right? You can eat more. People think that if I'm working with a team, I'm gonna eat less. No. Okay? By yourself, what can you hunt? Maybe it's a rabbit, maybe a mouse. But if you have a team, what can you get? A zebra. Maybe 2 or 3 zebras. And how long are you eating as opposed to eating that mouse? So anyways, you guys take it easy. Hopefully you guys feel where I'm coming from. God bless. You guys know the drill.